At 8 p.m. on a Tuesday, Julian Vance made a decision that would cost him everything he'd built. He looked across a glass desk at the man he trusted most and said, "Marcus, I need to tell you something." 24 hours later, Julian was sitting on rain-soaked steps outside the headquarters that once bore his name, holding a termination notice and a cardboard box. Between those two moments, no crime was committed, no laws were broken, just a conversation between two men in tailored suits, a secret that changed ownership the moment it left Julian's lips, and a trust that proved to be catastrophically one-sided.
Wait, before we see what really happened next, I need you to do something right now. If you want to see exactly how Marcus weaponized Julian's confession, if you want to know the 3 psychological traps Julian fell into that you're probably falling into right now, and if you want to learn how to identify the Marcus in your life before they destroy you, then you need to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because what I'm about to show you in the next 10 minutes isn't just Julian's tragedy, it's a masterclass in how power actually works. This is about the difference between being vulnerable and being exposed. So subscribe now, drop a comment telling me if you've ever trusted the wrong person with the right information, and let's jump into the 24 hours that erased everything. Trust me, you do not want to miss what happens in that boardroom. Now, let's get back to Julian's story.
Julian Vance didn't look like a man on the edge of catastrophe. At 36, he was everything Silicon Valley worshipped: brilliant, charismatic, and worth 9 figures on paper. His company, Nexus, had revolutionized institutional trading with an elegance that made Wall Street dinosaurs look like they were trading with abacuses. $3 billion in valuation, Forbes covers, TED Talk invitations he didn't have time to accept. But success at that altitude comes with a particular kind of loneliness. The glass-walled office that overlooked the city felt less like a throne room and more like an aquarium. Everyone could see him, but no one could really reach him. The board wanted growth projections, the employees wanted inspiration, the press wanted sound bites. Nobody wanted the truth. That's why Marcus Williams mattered. Marcus wasn't just Nexus's lead investor, he was the man who had believed in Julian when Nexus was 3 people in a WeWork and a pitch deck held together with ambition and caffeine. Marcus had gray temples, a measured speaking style, and the kind of calm authority that made nervous founders feel like everything would be fine. To Julian, Marcus wasn't just a mentor, he was the closest thing to a father figure Julian had in this sterile world of cap tables and liquidity events. So when Marcus suggested they meet late on that Tuesday evening to catch up away from the noise, Julian felt something he rarely experienced anymore: relief. Finally, a conversation with someone who understood the weight. The office was quiet, except for the low hum of servers and the distant rumble of the city below. Marcus poured 2 glasses of bourbon, the expensive kind that venture capitalists gift each other when deals close. They talked about market conditions, about the upcoming Series D, about everything except what Julian really wanted to discuss. Then Julian said it. "Marcus, there's something I need you to know, something I've been carrying alone for too long." Marcus leaned back, expression unchanged, and waited. Julian told him about the ghost in the machine. In Nexus's first year, when survival meant making impossible choices, Julian had implemented a technical workaround, a brilliant, legally ambiguous shortcut that allowed them to process trades faster than their infrastructure should have allowed. It had saved the company. It had also created a foundational flaw that sat like a ticking bomb beneath 5 years of exponential growth. "It's fixable," Julian said quickly. "I've been working on a migration strategy, but I needed someone to know. I needed someone I trust to help me think through how to handle this without spooking the board or tanking confidence." The words came faster now, like a dam breaking. Julian talked about the isolation, about the impossible standard of the visionary CEO who's supposed to have all the answers. He talked about wanting to lead with radical honesty, about building a company culture that didn't require everyone to pretend everything was perfect all the time. Marcus asked careful, clarifying questions. He wanted to understand the technical details, the timeline, the potential exposure. Julian, interpreting this as genuine partnership, answered everything. He felt the weight lifting with each revelation. This was what trust was supposed to feel like. When Julian finally finished, Marcus nodded slowly. "I appreciate you telling me this. This is exactly the kind of transparency that makes great partnerships work." They shook hands. Marcus's grip was firm, steady, reassuring. Julian went home that night and slept better than he had in months. He'd done the hard thing. He'd been vulnerable. He'd chosen connection over the crushing isolation of perfection. What Julian didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the moment Marcus walked out of that office, the information stopped being a shared burden and became a strategic asset. And Marcus was a man who understood the difference.
Marcus Williams sat in his car in the parking garage for 20 minutes after leaving Julian's office. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shocked. He was calculating. The confession changed everything, but not in the way Julian imagined. What Julian saw as vulnerability, Marcus saw as volatility. What Julian framed as fixable, Marcus recognized as catastrophic reputational risk for the fund. Marcus had built his career on one principle: protect the portfolio at all costs. And a founder who admits to foundational flaws isn't someone you help. He's someone you contain. By the time Marcus pulled out of the garage, he'd made 3 phone calls. The first was to Jennifer Zhao, Nexus's board chair. "We need an emergency session," Marcus said, his voice perfectly neutral. "I've received information that requires immediate governance review." The second call was to David Chen, the fund's chief counsel. "Dust off the morality clause language in Julian's employment agreement. I need to know exactly what triggers immediate termination without severance." The third call was to Sarah Morrison, a forensic auditor whose specialty was finding exactly what you told her to look for. "I need your team on standby for tomorrow morning. I'll have specific technical documentation for you to review." Marcus didn't lie. He didn't manipulate the facts. He simply recontextualized them. Julian's ghost in the machine became admitted foundational fraud risk. Julian's honesty became evidence of poor judgment and fiduciary negligence. The same information, just viewed through a different lens, the lens of institutional self-preservation. By 7 a.m. Wednesday morning, while Julian was drinking coffee and reviewing the technical migration strategy he planned to present to Marcus, the board was convening an emergency session. The conversation was brief and clinical. "The founder has disclosed a structural liability that he intentionally concealed from governance. The liability is material. The concealment is verified by his own admission. The reputational exposure is unquantifiable." Someone asked if they should give Julian a chance to fix it. He's had 5 years to fix it. What he had was time to disclose it. He chose concealment, then crisis confession. That's not leadership. That's a liability in motion. The vote to activate the morality clause took 4 minutes. By 10 a.m., Sarah Morrison's audit team was being briefed on exactly where to look, what to document, and how to frame their findings for maximum legal defensibility. They didn't need to manufacture evidence. Julian had provided a roadmap. They just needed to follow it. At 11:30 a.m., Julian received an email from Jennifer. "Emergency board meeting at 2 p.m. Your presence is required." Julian felt a flutter of anxiety, but pushed it down. Of course they'd want to discuss this. Marcus had probably briefed them already, exactly as Julian had hoped. This would be the solution meeting, a chance to present the migration plan, to show the board that he was ahead of this, that transparency was the first step in a careful remediation process. He put on his best suit. He printed copies of the technical documentation. He even practiced the opening remarks in the mirror. "I want to start by acknowledging that I should have brought this to the board sooner, but I'm here now with a solution and with a renewed commitment to the radical honesty that should define our culture." Julian walked into that conference room at 1:58 p.m. with a leather portfolio and a travel mug of coffee. He believed he was walking into a collaborative problem-solving session. He had no idea that his employment had already been terminated 2 hours earlier and that everything happening next was just procedure. The system had already decided. Julian was still operating on yesterday's reality.
the reality where honesty built trust and problems were solvable. That reality had ended the moment Marcus left his office the night before.
The conference room was full, but something was wrong. Julian could feel it before anyone spoke. The way eyes didn't quite meet his, the way Jennifer's expression was surgically neutral, the way Marcus sat with his hands folded and his face arranged in something that might have been sympathy if you didn't look too carefully. "Julian, please sit," Jennifer said. Julian sat. He opened his portfolio. "I've prepared a comprehensive—" "That won't be necessary." Jennifer slid a single document across the table. "Effective immediately, your employment with Nexus has been terminated for cause under Section 7.3 of your employment agreement. We'll need your credentials, your access badges, and any company property." The words didn't make sense at first. Julian's brain tried to reorder them into something logical. There had to be a mistake. He'd come here to fix the problem, not to... "I disclosed this in good faith," Julian said, and hated how his voice sounded. "I came to Marcus because I trust—" "You disclosed a material breach of fiduciary duty that you concealed for 5 years," Jennifer interrupted. "The board has determined that this represents an irreparable violation of trust. Security will escort you to collect your personal items." Julian looked at Marcus. Surely Marcus would explain. Surely Marcus would tell them this was supposed to be a collaborative solution, that Julian had been trying to do the right thing. Marcus met his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. "I'm sorry, Julian, but the fund has responsibilities." That's when Julian understood. The confession hadn't been the beginning of a solution. It had been the end of everything. The next 8 hours were a blur of humiliation executed with corporate precision. His badge stopped working at 4:27 p.m. His company email was deactivated by 3:15 p.m. His lawyer, the one he'd kept on retainer for acquisition negotiations, called at 4 p.m. to say he couldn't represent Julian anymore due to potential conflicts of interest. By 6 p.m., the story had leaked. The headline was surgical in its damage. "Nexus founder admits to foundational fraud risk. Board terminates CEO." The stock didn't dip. It evaporated. Nexus shares, which had closed at $127 on Tuesday, opened Wednesday at $89 and were trading at $34 by market close. Investors who'd praised Julian's vision 36 hours earlier were now filing class action paperwork and giving quotes about systematic deception. Julian's personal wealth was almost entirely in Nexus equity. He watched 9 figures become 8, then 7, then numbers that meant he'd need to liquidate his apartment to afford the legal bills that were already mounting. By 8 p.m. Wednesday, exactly 24 hours after he'd said, "I trust you," Julian was sitting on the rain-soaked steps outside Nexus headquarters, holding a cardboard box with his nameplate, a photo of his parents, and a trophy from the Innovator of the Year award he'd won 8 months earlier. The building still had his name on it. They hadn't gotten around to changing the signage yet. That would happen by Friday. Julian wasn't crying. He was just sitting there watching people walk past without recognizing him. The rain was cold and relentless. A security guard he'd known for 3 years walked by, saw him, and quickly looked away. Julian understood now with a clarity that felt like drowning that honesty isn't a shield. It's a spotlight. It illuminates everything, including every target on your back, every vulnerability in your armor, every reason someone might need to destroy you to protect themselves. Marcus hadn't lied. Marcus hadn't even been cruel. Marcus had simply done the rational thing. He'd taken information that threatened the fund's reputation and neutralized it with maximum efficiency. Julian's mistake wasn't trusting someone evil. His mistake was believing shared history was the same as shared interests. The truth Julian learned too late was simple. A secret doesn't betray you, but the moment you give it away, it no longer belongs to you. It belongs to whoever can use it best. And in the game of power, best rarely means kindly.
Here's what Julian's collapse reveals about the world we're actually living in. Vulnerability without strategy is just exposure with better marketing. Julian's tragedy wasn't that he was dishonest, it's that he confused emotional relief with strategic thinking. He was tired, lonely, and carrying a weight that successful people are told they're not allowed to admit. So when Marcus offered what looked like safety, Julian made the same mistake most of us make. He assumed that because someone had been there in the past, they would protect him in the future. But here's the uncomfortable truth you need to internalize. Trust and aligned interests are not the same thing. Marcus wasn't evil. He didn't betray Julian out of malice. He simply did the math and realized that protecting Julian meant risking everything else. And when faced with that choice, Marcus chose survival. So would most people. So might you. This is where it gets personal. Right now, you probably have a Marcus in your life. Maybe it's a business partner, maybe it's a mentor, maybe it's someone you're about to promote or confide in, and you're confusing their presence in your success story with permanent loyalty. You're thinking, they were there when I had nothing, so they'll be there when I have something to lose. That's not how power works. The people who helped you build the mountain are not automatically the same people who will protect you at the summit. Because at a certain altitude, the air changes, the stakes change, and people start doing cost-benefit analyses on relationships they used to treat as sacred. So how do you navigate this without becoming cynical? How do you stay human in a world that punishes humanness? First, learn the difference between authentic leadership and strategic suicide. Authentic leadership means being honest about challenges while maintaining boundaries around information that can be weaponized. Julian could have built a culture of transparency without handing Marcus a loaded gun. He could have said, "We have technical debt we're addressing," without providing the forensic roadmap to his own destruction. Second, understand the alignment test. Before you share anything sensitive, ask yourself, if this person's interests diverged from mine tomorrow, what would they do with this information? Not what you hope they'd do, what the incentive structure would make them do. Marcus's incentives were always clear: protect the fund. Julian just convinced himself that he was the fund. He wasn't. He was an asset, and assets get liquidated when they become liabilities. Third, recognize that loneliness at the top is not a problem to be solved by radical confession. It's a condition to be managed with wisdom. Julian was lonely, and that loneliness made him reckless. He wanted a father figure, so he turned Marcus into one in his mind, but Marcus never signed up for that role. Marcus was an investor doing investor math. If you're in a position of leadership and you're feeling isolated, that feeling is real and it's valid, but the solution is not to dump your vulnerabilities on people whose job is to evaluate your competence. The solution is to build a kitchen cabinet of advisors who have nothing to gain from your failure, people outside your industry, people who knew you before the success, people whose relationship with you isn't transactional. Fourth, practice what I call strategic vulnerability. This means being selectively honest in ways that build connection without creating exposure. You can share the struggle without sharing the blueprint to exploit it. You can admit you're tired without admitting you're compromised. You can ask for help without handing over the knife. And finally, here's the lesson Julian learned too late. Information doesn't have loyalty. Once you say something out loud, you no longer control what it becomes. Julian said, "I need help fixing this." Marcus heard, "I am a reputational risk." Same words, different translation. And in the world of high stakes, the translation that protects power is the one that wins. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds like you're telling me to never trust anyone, to be calculating and cold. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying be intentional. Trust is not a light switch, it's a spectrum. You can trust someone with your time without trusting them with your secrets. You can trust someone's competence without trusting their loyalty. You can trust someone's past behavior without assuming it predicts their future choices when the stakes change. Julian wasn't destroyed by a villain. He was destroyed by a system doing exactly what systems do, optimizing for survival. And he placed himself in the path of that optimization without realizing it.
So before you share your ghost, before you seek the relief of radical honesty, ask yourself, am I being brave or am I being reckless? Am I building trust or am I creating leverage against myself? Am I confiding in someone whose interests are permanently aligned with mine, or am I confiding in someone who will do the math when the pressure comes? The most powerful thing you own is not your vision, your product, or your network. It's the information that only you know. Guard it like the asset it is. And when you do share it, make sure you're doing it with someone who has more to lose from your destruction than they have to gain from your exposure. Because Julian's story isn't a cautionary tale about trusting the wrong person. It's a cautionary tale about not understanding what trust actually costs and who's really willing to pay that price when the bill comes due.
If you enjoyed this story, we would appreciate it if you support us with a like and subscribe to our channel, Insta Justice. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, drop a comment with your biggest takeaway, and I'll see you in the next one. Because the person you trust most might be the only one with enough information to destroy you, and you need to know how to spot them before it's too late. Thanks for your unconditional support in every story. Blessings to you and your family.